1815. Europe slept uneasily. A year earlier, they had defeated Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who had conquered kings and rewritten empires. He had been exiled to the island of Elba, far from the continent he once ruled. The victors toasted the end of an age, but they underestimated the man they had caged. In February, Napoleon slipped away from Elba with barely 1,000 men, veterans still loyal to their emperor. As he marched through France, soldiers sent to arrest him instead knelt in the road. "If you would shoot your emperor," he said, "shoot now." Not a musket fired. The king fled. The people rose. The eagle had returned. In Paris, the tricolour flew once more. But the joy was brief. Europe united again, this time not in fear, but in determination. Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia swore that Napoleon would not rise a second time. Across the Channel, the Duke of Wellington prepared his army. Across the Rhine, the Prussians gathered under Blücher. Across the plains of France, Napoleon forged one final army, younger, leaner, desperate. The drums of destiny beat again. The emperor was coming home to war. By June, the thunder of armies filled the fields of Belgium. Napoleon's plan was brilliant. Strike fast, divide the enemy before they could unite. Wellington and Blücher must be crushed separately, and the road to Brussels would be open. French advanced north through the rain, their boots sinking into mud, their cannon wheels creaking through mire. Villages burned. Scouts clashed in the hedgerows. At Ligny, Napoleon struck the Prussians, a brutal, close-range battle of musket and bayonet. He won, but Blücher escaped. The Prussian army, bloodied yet unbroken, retreated toward the sound of British drums. Napoleon turned west toward Waterloo, where Wellington had drawn up his defense on a low ridge between two farms, La Haye-Sainte and Hougoumont. The British waited, red coats darkened with rain, muskets glistening under grey skies. Their commander, calm and cool, studied the horizon through his spyglass. "They will come in the morning," he said, and when the morning came, the storm followed. June 18th, 1815. The dawn at Waterloo was soaked in rain. The battlefield stretched 3 miles wide, rolling farmland, hedges, and mud thick as glue. Napoleon rode the lines inspecting his guns. Around him, the Grande Armée waited, silent, except for the snort of horses and the crackle of wet straw fires. For hours, the Emperor watched the clouds. The ground was too soft for cannon. He waited for the sun to dry the earth. It was his final delay! A few hours that would change history. Across the valley, Wellington's men stood in shallow trenches, shivering but ready. The mist lifted, revealing the tricolour banners. Drums rolled. The last great battle of the Age of Empire was about to begin. The soldiers of France cheered their emperor as he raised his hand. He whispered to his staff, "This is a fine day. It would end in ruin." At 11 a.m., the thunder began. French cannon opened fire, shaking the valley with a sound like tearing heaven. Round shot ploughed through the British ranks, tossing men and horses into the air. Smoke rolled across the fields, thick as fog. Wellington's troops crouched behind ridges, invisible until the last second. When the French advanced, the red line rose and fired as one, musket volleys flashing through the haze. Men fell by hundreds, the air filled with the screams of the wounded and the whinnying of dying horses. For hours, the artillery duel raged. Hills caught fire, farmhouses became fortresses. Hougoumont burned, yet the British guards inside refused to yield. Napoleon watched through his glass, impatient. He ordered fresh attacks. The mud swallowed his cavalry, the smoke blinded his guns, but the Emperor pressed on. "Break their centre," he commanded, and the plain of Waterloo dissolved into chaos, iron and thunder, courage and death. By afternoon, the French cavalry could wait no longer. Marshal Ney, the bravest of the brave, spurred his horse forward. Behind him, thousands of riders formed into glittering lines, cuirassiers in polished breastplates, dragoons, lancers, the pride of France. Bugles sounded. The ground shook. They charged uphill into the smoke, sabres flashing, shouting, "Vive l'Empereur!" But the British infantry did not break. At Wellington's order, the redcoats formed squares, hollow boxes of men, 4 ranks deep, bayonets, outward. Cannon fire tore holes in their ranks, but they closed again. The French cavalry circled, fired pistols, slashed, and fell back, only to charge again. For an hour, the field was a blur of hooves and blood. Ney lost 5 horses beneath him. Still he fought on, sword in hand, face black with powder. Yet the squares held. The greatest cavalry on earth could not break a wall of men. Heroism met futility, and courage turned to slaughter. They stood like islands in a sea of chaos. Smoke drifted around them, shells burst overhead, and yet the British squares held firm, steady, silent, unflinching. Each man fired only when he could see the whites of the French eyes. The recoil bruised their shoulders, the powder blackened their faces, but still they fired. "Hard pounding this, gentlemen," Wellington muttered. "But we shall see who can pound the longest." When the French horsemen withdrew, the ground was littered with men and beasts. The squares were soaked in rain and blood, but they had not moved. For the first time that day, Napoleon's confidence faltered. He looked to the east, where, in the distance, dark shapes were moving through the trees. They were not his men, they were Prussians. The tide was about to turn. Out of the mist came salvation. Marshal Blücher's Prussian army, battered from Ligny but unbroken, marched toward the sound of guns. Columns of infantry emerged from the woods, their black uniforms streaked with mud, their drums beating a steady rhythm of vengeance. They had come to join the battle and to settle an old score. At 4 p.m., their lead elements struck Napoleon's right flank. Cannon thunder answered cannon. The French, already stretched to the breaking point, now faced fresh armies pouring onto the field. Napoleon hurled his reserves against them, but every moment brought more Prussians. The line bent, cracked, began to crumble. Wellington saw it and sensed victory. He rose in his saddle and shouted, "Now, Maitland, now's your time!" The British surged forward. The French line shuddered. The end had begun. As dusk fell, the battlefield was smoke and ruin. Napoleon, desperate, turned to his last reserve. The Imperial Old Guard, veterans of Austerlitz, men who had never known defeat. Their bearskin caps rose above the haze like black towers. The Emperor rode before them. "The Guard advances!" he cried. With drums beating, they marched uphill into the guns, their faces lit by the dying sun. British cannon tore gaps in their ranks, but still they came, bayonets fixed, shouting "Vive l'Empereur!" At the crest, they met the fire of an entire army. The line wavered, once, twice, and then for the first time in their history, the Old Guard broke. Someone shouted, "La Garde recule!" The Guard retreats, panic spread like fire. The invincible army of Napoleon dissolved into chaos. Night descended, and with it came realization. From his hilltop, Napoleon watched the field fade beneath smoke and rain. Around him, aides wept. Officers pleaded. But the Emperor said nothing. He simply lowered his telescope. He had gambled everything, and lost. The Prussians were everywhere, the British advancing. The Imperial Guard was gone. The drums had fallen silent. He mounted his horse slowly, rode a few paces, and turned once to look back. Lightning flashed across the plain, illuminating the dead, the banners, the mud. And the dream of an empire turned to ruin. For Napoleon, the battlefield of Waterloo was not just defeat, it was destiny fulfilled. The French army fled through the darkness, broken, terrified, leaderless. Cannons stuck in mud were abandoned. Horses collapsed in ditches. Men threw away muskets and ran. Roads became rivers of fugitives, the cries of the wounded echoing into the rain. Wellington, standing beneath a shattered tree, whispered, "Night or the Prussians must end this slaughter." By dawn it was over. The once great Grande Armée was no more. Napoleon's dream had drowned in Belgian mud. He fled toward Paris, his uniform soaked, his eyes hollow. The eagle had fallen, and Europe at last exhaled. When the sun rose on June 19th, silence ruled Waterloo. The smoke cleared to reveal a wasteland of bodies and shattered weapons. More than 50,000 men lay dead or dying. The rain had washed the blood into the soil, turning it black. Farmers returned to their fields to find them sown with death. Crows gathered on broken cannon, Horses wandered riderless among the corpses. The victors buried the fallen of both sides in mass graves. For all their flags and causes, the men who lay there were the same, young, brave, and far from home. The age of Napoleon had ended, the modern world had begun. Napoleon fled into exile once more, this time to the island of St. Helena, a lonely rock in the Atlantic. There, under grey skies and endless wind, the Emperor of Europe became a prisoner of memory. He spent his final years dictating his story, reliving each battle, each triumph, each mistake. When asked if he regretted Waterloo, he smiled faintly. Regret? No, only that I lost the dice roll of fate. He died in 1821, 6 years after his last stand. His body was returned to France decades later, to rest beneath the dome of Les Invalides, the soldier king beneath marble and silence, but the echoes of Waterloo never faded. It ended an age of empires built on a single man's will. It began the Europe of nations, alliances, and memory, and on the quiet field outside Brussels, when the wind moves through the grass, some still swear they hear drums, faint, distant, and proud. The eagle fell, but legend took flight.